you're a believer in God and Jesus, this is a powerful day. And we are going to finish our series on famous last words. We've been trying to give you some of the last words that Jesus spoke on this earth, so that they would be in your mind and in your heart for the rest of your life, so that they will absolutely, as the little video said, that not only will the world be changed, but you will be changed as an individual. So if you're visiting with us, we make no bones about it. We would love to have you hang around here every Sunday, right, congregation? And if you'd like to talk to us about that, don't hesitate to see us, because we are all about wanting you to be a part of what is going on in this place. It's not fair. Now, siblings use that sometime. Maybe a situation where mom and dad are more lenient on the youngest child than they were on the oldest child. That happens, right? You've experienced that. Well, our youngest kid actually, in our siblings, 4 of us, Ricky was born on Halloween. Now, I always made a big deal out of that he was kind of weird, and I tried to encourage that his entire life, and I still do. But I remember, I'm about 8 years older than he is, so I remember when he was 1, I found this little black and white photograph, because this was like, right after the ark landed where it was going to be. And I found this little black and white picture, and it shows Ricky in his high chair, and there's a birthday cake on his little tray with 1 candle in it. So it's his first birthday party. He's got on a little hat, and he looks really cute. And I don't ever tell him he looks cute. But anyway, I'm standing there in my Halloween costume. It's one of those black pajama-looking things with the skeleton just painted on it, with a skeleton mask. And this photograph means a lot to me, because I was standing there thinking, it's not fair. I am 8, and I have never had a birthday party. And I just said, that's not fair. I didn't say anything to my mom or my dad, because I love them and I respect them and all that good stuff, but I can't remember having a birthday party up to that point. So this might have happened to you in other places. Maybe you've worked on a job for years and you are thinking about, well, one of these days I'm going to be promoted because I deserve it. And this young whippersnapper has been hired, and he does your same job, and the boss overlooks you for the promotion and gives it to the younger guy. That happens, doesn't it? What about the guy that's bad, that becomes very rich, and the one that is very good, and both of these people, and you just say, well, that's just not fair that this bad guy gets things that this good guy doesn't get in the way of prosperity. There's really a different one to look at sometimes. One that really shakes me is that the guy that has committed murder, and he is sitting on death row, and there's been a prison ministry while he's been there waiting for years for his execution. And finally the word gets in his mind and his heart, and he accepts Jesus. They bring in one of those portable baptistries and they baptize him into Christ. And the day he is executed, he goes to his execution, and then he goes to heaven. And we say, well, that's not fair. How in the world is that fair? It's fair because of God's unfair good grace. God's unfair good grace. And today I want to impress upon you that as we celebrate the resurrection of the Son of God, the one that came from the dead and gives us the same hope, that we think about our own lives. I might ask you right now, Are you going through some things that you might think are kind of unfair right now? It's possible. And I know this message, as I start, it doesn't sound much like an Easter message, and maybe it's not in the traditional sense, but I will assure you that as we get into this, you will find that this is a practical application of what Jesus accomplished when He came from the grave. Is that all right? Most people want things to be fair. You remember Cinderella? Cindy grows up in her stepmother's house with stepsisters. All the animals love her. She can sing like a meadowlark. She's a sweet person that wouldn't hurt a fly. But her stepmother and her stepsisters hate her guts. They have made her a slave in their home. She wears rags. She has to sleep on the floor. You name it. They don't feed her right. Nothing. And then there's this big ball that comes up, this big dance. And the fairy godmother comes and does her thing with a wand and does a few poofing things. You know poofing things. P-O-O-F-F-I-N-G. F-I-N-G. Poofing. And poof, there's a carriage. She's got a beautiful dress. The whole works. And she goes to the ball and meets the handsome prince. But the clock strikes 12. She's running down the long staircase because she knows the fairy godmother says that when the clock strikes 12, you're going to change back into your rags. Your way of life tonight is going to end very shortly. So she runs down the stairs, and sure enough, she's in rags again. She's back in slavery to her family. There's one little caveat that's going to be good for her. She leaves this beautiful glass slipper on the stairs as she leaves. And that glass slipper fits her foot perfectly, and she gets the man, and he gets her, and they live what? Happily ever after. You see, the fairy godmother comes to move her from one position to another. Jesus came to move us from one position to another. And I will assure you right now that life is not a fairy tale. I don't have to tell you that. Neither is God's unfair good grace, folks. That is not a fairy tale either. It is a reality. God's love put Jesus on the cross. It is His love and His power that brought Him back from the grave. Jesus is the glass slipper. And here's the beautiful, beautiful fact. And it's one size fits all. You don't have to have a certain kind of life. Jesus is going to love you to God if you will let Him do that. He is the glass slipper that gives us the opportunity to live happily ever after in eternity with God and with Him. How cool is that on Easter Sunday morning, 2019? His love raised Him. But listen, it's not a fairy tale. The necessary payment was a result of my sin and your sin, and Jesus paid the price on the cross. We live thinking that there's this battle going on. This battle of what's fair and what's unfair in life. And we apply that almost on a daily basis. Because when we get to thinking that way, we think, well, some of life is fair. And some of life is unfair. Let me show you something here. We like it. In fact, we believe it. Most of the time, we like the fact that people get what they deserve, don't we? That people get exactly what they deserve. God comes along and gives us Jesus, and He has this unfair good grace. And the beauty of the Easter message is you do not have to get what you deserve. I don't know of a better message on Easter Sunday than that. Jesus spent 3 years in ministry with some guys. 12, and then Judas is out of the picture because he let sin take him out. He spent life with these people. He lived with these guys. You would think that these guys would be the most stellar citizens that ever walked the face of the earth. They lived with Jesus. But that's not true. They made poor decisions in their lives like we do sometimes. They don't say the right thing sometimes, just like we don't say the right things. In fact, Peter, the head guy of the apostles, he was impetuous. Peter didn't think about anything before he did it. He thought, he made decisions without thinking. He acted without thinking. He spoke without thinking. And many times it got him into some weird situations. He made these bold statements without thinking about what the consequences would be. When Jesus was about to be arrested and go to the cross, he looked these guys that were his close associates in the eye and he said, "Look, it's going to get really hard pretty quick here in a few hours. And you guys are going to be scared to death. In fact, your fear is going to cause you to abandon me." Well, you could you hear how quiet it got when I said that? That's how quiet it was with them. Well, in Mark 14, we have recorded that Peter rebels against Jesus' idea. And Peter says, "Never, Lord, no way. Even if all of these desert you, I will never desert you." Have you ever had never to come back and bite you? I'm never going to do that again. Peter says, "Lord, I will not desert you." Jesus said, "Peter, yes, you will." He says, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. 3? No, not me, Lord. I'd never do that. Peter swore that he would have Jesus' back. And then he turned his back. He denied him 3 times. He failed the loyalty test. See, when somebody tells us they're going to be loyal to us, sometimes we fail it and sometimes they fail it. And they may never get what they deserve, and we say, "That's really unfair. That should not be that way." Jesus' response is recorded in John 21. Let me give you a backstory before I tell you where we're going this morning. The backstory is this. Peter's back to fishing. Jesus has been raised from the dead. He lived on earth 40 days before he left to go back to heaven. And the third visit he makes to his disciples or his apostles are on a beach. Peter's lolling around on the beach with some of those guys, and he says, "I'm going fishing." They said, "Well, we don't have anything to do either, so we're going with you, Peter." So they launch their boat, and they fish all night. When the sun's coming up in the morning, they see this guy standing on the beach. And this guy yells out to them, "Hey, have you guys caught anything?" "No! All night, nothing." "Well, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll catch some." Would you have done it? They probably thought, "Well, what do we got to lose? Let's try it." So they threw it over, and sure enough, it was full of fish. They couldn't even put it in the boat. In fact, in Mark records there were 153 fish. John punches Peter and says, "Peter, it's the Lord." Peter grabs his cloak and jumps out of the boat and swims to shore, and they paddle the boat because they're dragging this net full of fish. And Jesus has this little fire going with hot coals and some fish already laying on it. And they start gathering around breakfast on the beach. You ever had breakfast on the beach? Sunrise? You ought to do it sometime. Maybe breakfast in your backyard. Just get up and have breakfast as the sun's coming up. How many of you haven't seen the sun come up in years? Oh, we won't ask. Hey, Peter's coming up to the fire. The other guys are getting there. Jesus says, give me some of the fish you've got. And they put them on the fire. So they're having breakfast on the beach. That's the backstory. In a moment, Peter's going to be eating and talking and sharing with Jesus. Jesus, the one he denied. This is the third time I said that Jesus has visited these guys after he was raised from the dead. Now, is that like us? Be honest. How many of you kind of have been betrayed by somebody and you just call them up one morning and say, hey, I'm going to make pancakes this morning. I want you to come to my house for breakfast. I'd like for us to get together and just talk a little bit. Do we ever do that? No. That's not like us. It would be unfair for us to be nice to that person that betrayed us. It wouldn't work. So we don't do that. We try to put Jesus and God in our own thought process, and it doesn't work. We're more like, you know what? I wouldn't spit on that person if they were on fire. That's a pretty bad one, isn't it? In other words, we act exactly the opposite of what Jesus is about to do with Peter. Because we don't think about these real life things that Jesus is going through with these people sometimes. Listen to this statement. If we want God to be fair with everyone, then we may not like what His fairness looks like. We don't want to be fair and invite those people to breakfast and talk with them and try to help the situation. It would be unfair to do that. Let's look at the text, John 21. Starting with verse 15, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, the commentators, they're not sure if he's talking about, do you love me more than you do the fish? You're back fishing. You're not doing what I've trained you to do. Or do you love these men more than you love me? It's speculation at best. Peter answers him and says, yes, Lord, he said. You know. He knows something's about to happen here, y'all. Peter's mind is grinding. His heart is in his shoes. He says, here it comes. The Lord's finally going to deal with me. That's what he's thinking. Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. It's kind of soft. Jesus said, then Peter, feed my sheep, my lambs. Feed them. Then he goes on. He says, again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, right here, you can see something happening, and a lot of people speculate also that Jesus asked him 3 times because he denied him 3 times. Maybe, maybe not. Simon of John, do you love me? Peter answered, yes, Lord, a little louder. You know I love you, Jesus. Jesus said, then take care of my sheep. Then the next verse, 17. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt. A few minutes ago, he was apprehensive because he thought, here it comes. The Lord's going to really chew me out now. Look, Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third. Why wouldn't he hurt? You denied him 3 times, Peter. And I think a little louder, maybe and with a little hurt, Jesus says, the third time, Peter says, Jesus asked him, he said, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Deep down in my heart, I am sorry for my sin. You know I love you. Jesus said then, feed my sheep. You see, Jesus responds to Peter differently than we respond to people that betray or deny us. Jesus said, Pete, you know something? We're good. Don't worry about that other stuff. I can tell you're worried about it. But better yet, Peter, I want you to go out and represent me to the world. Here's Peter, the denier, getting a promotion. Getting a leadership responsibility. And that is unfair. The fair thing would be, Lord, I love you, but don't you want me to go and clean the trash up on the beach? Don't you want me to go wash a few feet or something? You see, Peter, he felt like he needed a punishment. But God's unfair good grace was involved. Jesus needed Peter to accomplish what he wanted him to accomplish. Peter had to learn. Yes, he messed up. He sinned. But he was going to be useful to Jesus. Jesus was unfair to Peter and forgave him. No strings. Gave Peter exactly what he did not deserve. Grace. Peter, you deserted me, but I love you anyway. Now go and love people like I love them. Wow. God's good. Unfair grace to Peter. In the same way, hear what I'm about to say. God's reaction to us when we sin is grace. And grace is not what we deserve, but God's unfair good grace is God's response to our sin. You can read the details in this book. But see, I want to caution you. I am not saying that sin is something you can be kind of flippant about. What I'm saying is that the cross was very painful. And when Jesus died on the cross, He died a cruel, torturous death. But He died with my name on His life and your name on His life. When the blood poured out of His veins, it should have been our blood. We don't deserve God's grace. Grace means unmerited favor. I can't do anything to get it. The cross was painful. Sin is painful. It has consequences. There are dangers. It separates and it kills. And we need to understand that. Peter sinned. He regretted his sin. He went out and wept and he repented. And he responded to the love of Jesus. He responded. Jesus did not knock Peter out of the picture. He did not leave Peter alone and not want to be involved in his life. Jesus made sure that Peter felt like he was in. He cooked him breakfast. And he reminded him of the very serious nature of the ministry that he wanted him to be in. You see, Jesus is always about salvation, not annihilation. He's all about salvation. You can't be good enough to go to heaven, and you can't be sinful enough not to that you are going to miss it. And here's what I'm saying. You can't be good enough, but you can't be sinful enough to miss heaven. And the reason for that is that Jesus is the glass slipper. And in Christ, no matter what your sin life, you can go to heaven. You can be saved for eternity. You can live happily ever after. That's the message of Easter. That's it. That's it. In Christ Jesus, sin, death, like Ryan said a few minutes ago, the grave, hell, all of that has been conquered. We celebrate. Listen, we will sin. I'm going to tell you that right now. Don't forget that. But when we do, we tend to assume that we'll get what is fair. That is, that God's going to stop loving us, and God's not going to be in us. He's not going to be with us. He's not going to want us to accomplish anything for Him. In other words, we think what we deserve is to be kicked out and not loved and not invited in. So what do? We let sin drop us out of church for a while. And the more you do it, the more you do it. Not coming becomes a habit, just like coming becomes a habit. We'll stop studying. We'll stop praying. We'll stop sharing Jesus with other people. In other words, we tend to back out and shrink back. You want some names? People start to think, I'm just not good enough. I've messed up. And that's not true. You can't be good enough. If it was about fairness, you'd be right to say you're not good enough. But it's not about fairness. It's about God's unfair good grace that He's willing to offer to you through His Son, Jesus Christ. The Easter message is that exactly. And here's what I want to leave you with. Accept God's grace. Just dive into it. And God's grace is sufficient for you. Jesus will lead you to change, but He will never lead you out of the door. He will not do that. Then, when you've settled that, when you've accepted that unfair grace, and Jesus is in you and you are in Him, then you are called on to extend an unfair good grace to other people. Just like Peter, we will meet all kinds of people who sin, who mess up. And we are to share with them, hey, we mess up too. But we have God's unfair grace that showers us when we do. When we repent of our sins, He forgives us. We can demonstrate the love and the forgiveness of Jesus instead of talking about people, leaving them out, not inviting them to breakfast. Remind them that we are also sinners, saved by what? Grace. Grace. Think about this as you leave today. How do you think Jesus responds to your personal sin? You think He's angry with you? Do you think you just disappointed Him? Do you think, well, He's going to leave me now. He's going to abandon me. Now, think this. He invites you to breakfast. He will not give you the silent treatment. He will talk to you. He invites you to be a part of His story as you share Him with others. If flawed Peter could be useful in building the church, so can you. His grace is bigger than fairness. Stop thinking about keeping score, what's fair and what's unfair, because God has demonstrated in His Son, given on the cross, raised from that tomb to live in heaven with Him, and gives us the hope that that will happen with us. It's unfair, but it's what God chooses to do for you and for me. So think about this Easter. Think about the fact that God's unfair, good grace can be yours.